Okay, I'm going to go over some thoughts you should consider when buying a bonsai pot. And the first one I'm going to talk about is shape. So there are a lot of different shapes that artists can make. Unconventional shapes tend to be a little bit more difficult. And to me, because it's more effort to make a difficult shape, I appreciate those. So for example here, this is a Moko shape. Let me actually show you the full profile. So as you can see, that shape is not easy to make, and something that was made on a wheel, so that would be a round shape, is much easier. And so that's one thing I consider. Let me show you actually some other shapes that are kind of difficult to make as well. So shallow ovals and rectangles can also be quite difficult to make. This one was made by Makinao. You could see it's very small, which is also challenging, and shallow and long. All difficult attributes to accomplish. Bottom is completely glazed as well. Okay, now let me show you an easier shape to make. So round pots are usually made on the wheel, and that is not considered as labor intensive as some of the other shapes. Now a rectangle is often slab built or made with a mold or block carved. So I'm going to show you now another somewhat labor intensive method of slab building, and I'll show you what that looks like. So here is a slab built rectangle. So they have to individually make each part, and then they fit them together. This it does take a lot of skill, especially when you have these thin walls, to not get any warpage, and it's definitely a show of talent when someone does it well. Now finally, I'm going to show you the block carving way of constructing a pot. So here is a block carved bonsai pot, and you could see these are much more labor intensive because they actually they get a block of clay, and they have to excavate out the shape of a pot. So I personally really like block carved pots. Some artists that block carve are Asa Wakamatsu, Wajaku, and a few others, and sometimes an artist will do it only once in a while. But that is something I really like to keep in mind if I'm buying a pot, because it shows that the artist put in a lot of work into making this piece. One last thing I should mention is the mold technique. So sometimes, especially when an artist is mass producing his works, he will use a mold, and they press in the clay into these molds. This technique is not as labor intensive as all the others, and I generally try to stay away from this, but a mold doesn't necessarily mean that pot doesn't look nice. But pots that are not made with a mold are much more unique, usually variable, and there's more skill that's put into making those pieces. You could tell this is actually made by a mold because of its immaculate shape. Usually there's warpage with these small little pieces, and also the feet are a telltale sign because they're identical and immaculate. Not saying that you can't do that without a mold, but they are actually so perfectly similar that it was definitely pressed into a mold. The next thing I think about when buying a pot are the feet. So feet are highly variable. You could have, in this case, you are looking at cloud feet, which are carved little clouds that are then attached to the pot. You may just have little stubs, little balls. There are a lot of different types of feet, and sometimes an artist will have his own unique take on making feet. But some feet are difficult to make and show the artist's skill. In this case, carving out those cloud feet definitely takes a high level of skill. So let's take a close look at these feet. So you could see that was all carved into there and then attached. Very impressive and beautiful. So here are little stubs, little tiny balls that were placed to make feet. This is for sure not the most challenging method, but that does not mean it's aesthetically not pleasing. But I do appreciate when an artist puts a lot of time into making their feet. Here are some very simply made bonsai feet, and you can see these are little L's. Let's get a better look. Those are much easier to create. This pot in particular though, because it's so small, it may have been actually quite challenging to carve out these little tiny feet and place them on the pot. So that's another thing to keep into consideration, is the size of the pot. Generally, mame pots are challenging to create. Let's look at another type of foot. Okay, next is carving. Oftentimes, artists will carve onto their pots, and this is very time-consuming and technical work. You can see on here, this is a pot by Okatani Zashin, a famous carver. On this very small pot, you can see that's all hand carved with tools. All these little dots, and it is, I'm sure, very time consuming to do that. Here, let's try to focus a little better. Okay, there we are. And you can see this metallic glaze on this pot. It almost looks like metal, but believe it or not, that is not. And there's actually a little chop on the very back. Signature. But there are a lot of different forms of detailed carving on pots. Let's move on and I'll show you some other forms of carving. Here the artist carved out the head of a pig and attached it to the side of the pot. Very beautiful, and that definitely took the artist probably an hour or so longer to make the pot. Here's another example of carving. On this old kyoyaki, there is a carved window. And that really complements this. That was a common technique slash style of this era. But I really appreciate it. These windows. So they're carved in on all sides. As you can see. Okay, next we are going to talk about glazes. So glazes are highly variable, and to me, I'm kind of a glaze freak, so that can make or break why I buy a pot. But sometimes you will never see that same glaze ever again. When an artist is making all these glazes, sometimes they're accidental, especially in the older kilns, like the wood-fired kilns. There's a lot of chaotic randomness that occurs in those kilns, and like the works of Tofukuji, oftentimes that glaze can never be the glaze can never be repeated, and And so that's something to consider. It's almost a collectability. Some people prefer unglazed. I like deciduous, broadleaf evergreens. I really like flowering trees that match with glazed pots. So I don't look to the coniferous pots as much, but that is a very big, glazes are very important to think about when buying a pot. Let's actually look at another glaze. Here's a wonderful glaze by Bouchouan. Sometimes when an artist really wants to show off, they'll actually glaze the bottom of the pot. So you can see he placed the glaze on the bottom. Amazing. And why that isn't necessary is because, of course, normally the pots are being used like so. So you don't see the bottoms. But if you're into collecting pots alongside using them, sometimes you want to look at the pot as a whole, the vessel as a whole. And so that can be, I appreciate when artists glaze the bottom. Even if it's maybe wasting a little bit of glaze for them, I think it's really beautiful. So age and the artist's name are two things that will really sometimes affect pricing a bit. Antique Chinese pots, if created in a very excellent manner with nice patina, can be well over $5,000. So age is very important. This isn't around 100-year-old pot. There's no artist that is associated with it, but because of the age, it is considered a little bit more valuable. Let's actually look at a name pot next. Okay, so eventually over time you will learn different artist names and what they're worth. This artist in particular, Tofukuji, kind of has a legacy behind him. So his pots can be quite pricey. And maybe you want that. You kind of want your Gucci, kind of like someone would get a Gucci purse. Maybe you want your Tofukuji pot. There's reason for the pricing. It could be rarity or it can be just demand. But definitely you want to think about the artist's name, and if you care about that. I do like buying an artist with a good story and history. To me, it makes the story and the composition a little bit more interesting and layered. But if you're more so just into the pot and how it looks, then maybe you want a pot without a name. But if you like age, maybe you just want an antique pot that has good age but no name, which is very possible to find. So another thing to think about is, does the pot have a lip? A lip, if you've ever made a bonsai pot yourself, you're going to realize that lip is to make uniform, symmetrical, immaculate along the rim of the pot is not easy. And when an artist kind of skips past that, you will see something like this. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad pot. It's not nearly as technical to create. Let me actually show another example. So this pot actually has no lip whatsoever. I still think it's beautiful, but maybe you want a nice lip to display the glaze that is dripping down the pot. Okay, and now we're going to talk about collectability. Some artists are a little bit more collectible than others because they don't make as many pots or there aren't as many pots available. And in that case, it will really increase the value, and maybe you won't be able to find one like it ever again. So if I see a pot by a certain artist that I may not really see again, and it's highly collectible, especially if you like collecting pots, it's a incentive to buy it for sure. Usability. So now this is another idea to wrap your head around. Some people value this more than others. I personally do not. I like small pots, very small pots, too large, and also large pots. But many people, if something is a larger size, they have an easier time using it, therefore they're more willing to buy it. Now keep in mind, in Japan, this doesn't always translate. Yes, sometimes bigger pots are more expensive, but not always. Some of those other factors we've discussed, like collectability and the glaze and the artist, can have a much stronger effect on pricing than usability. Okay, I think it's about time to wrap things up. We talked about almost everything you want to consider when buying a pot. The shape of the pot, the feet of the pot, if there's carving on the pot, the lip of the pot, the age of the pot, what artist made the pot, collectability, usability, the glaze, which to me is a big factor. And there are other things as well, but those are the main things I personally think about when I'm looking to purchase a high quality bonsai pot. I really like the details. The details for me kind of push me into the buy zone or push me out of the buy zone. So hopefully when you go out there and purchase your own bonsai container, these tips on what to look for will help you out. So thanks for sticking around and watching the whole video if you did. Hopefully that helps. And make sure to check out my website, kibonsaiart.com. And please like the video if you enjoyed it. It really shows me that people like what I'm posting, and it also will just make the algorithm, which is kind of like the eye of Sauron, look at this video so other people can see it as well. So thank you, and I will see you next time. Bye.